Good evening and welcome everybody to this evening's webinar. My name is Anna Hull and I'm the Director of Operations at RDA. This evening's webinar is about restarting RDA, don't wait for normality to return. I've got a couple of fantastic speakers for you today. So first of all, I've got Lesley Davies from the Beaver Vale RDA group, and I've also got Caroline Ward, Head of Communications and Insight at RDA. I've also got a video from a couple of people which I'll be showing a bit later on. So the kind of key thing and the reason we're having this session today is that we're really pleased that we've got 47% of our group, some 212 groups, signed off to restart, and that feels like a bit of a milestone. We're edging towards the 50%. But then that does mean that just over 50% haven't opened back up again. And therefore, there is a number of things that you obviously need to think about to get restarted. We have heard a number of groups saying to us that we'll wait for kind of normality to happen before we get back going. And we've heard about on the 21st of June, things may be removed in terms of legal gathering limits in England. And I think it's the 28th of June in Scotland and other dates in the other home countries. But it's still really uncertain about what may happen beyond that date. It is still possible there may be social distancing in place. People may still be asked to wear face coverings. So we still need to be mindful of what COVID is all about. The other thing we need to bear in mind that groups that will have closed, that will have closed in March 2020 wouldn't have been open for well over 12 months now. And so you actually do need to think about all the things you need to put in place. Even if we ignore COVID, if we take all of that away, then your volunteers will be rusty, your horses certainly will be rusty, as might your coaches, and your participants might be quite nervous about coming back. So you do need to think really quite carefully about coming back. And we don't just want you to wait for normality, because we don't know when that's going to be. So we're going to cover off those aspects today. The other thing that I wanted to pick up with you in terms of the paperwork and the timing of the paperwork, we have a trustee checklist, and there are a number of people that think that perhaps they have to tick yes for everything in order to be signed off. But in actual fact, we're asking you to be signed off before anybody comes back to your group. So whether you're welcoming volunteers back to restart your equines, you do need to submit your paperwork. So if you can't answer yes to everything, so you won't be able to answer yes that all the participants have done a participant consent form, then just put that within the detail. So you need to tick no for that box. So actually you do need to think about getting back started and doing the paperwork quite early. And we'll also talk a little bit later on about making sure that we restart slowly. And before I move on to Lesley and ask her a whole host of questions about how she restarted her group, I just want to share a little video from Claire Phillips, who's at the Ipswich group. She actually got signed, or the group actually got signed off to restart just 6 days ago. They are a group with the last annual return that had 38 participants. They operate from a riding school, and they've got 30 volunteers, and they use 9 horses from that riding school. They haven't been active in sessions, and they're hoping to get active in sessions in the next couple of weeks, but they have been working quite closely with their school, and they've had a really lovely initiative throughout the winter when they were able to, called RDA at School, where they sent a few of their volunteers into the school and kept that really close engagement and communication with the school. And their junior riders were doing the points of the pony, they were doing colouring in, and they kept them engaged. So I'm going to now try and share my screen, if the technology will allow me, to show you a video from Claire.
Hello, I'm Claire from the Ipswich group of RDA, and today we've had our induction for volunteers as we prepare to restart our sessions in a couple of weeks' time. The things we've been looking at, first of all, how can we build a safe area for riders to stand in before they mount their pony. We used to do this with cones and a rope. We're going to use these plastic barriers. They're much easier to clean and they live outside, so that's 2 lines of defence against COVID. Coming round here to our caravan, we thought about zoning the caravan. It's a one-person area. As you can see, it's quite small. You wouldn't want more than one person in here at a time, even though back in the day, obviously, we all used to come in and get all the stuff out at once. We can't do that anymore. Here's our risk assessment. I must thank everyone at RDA HQ. They were so helpful. I used the template and added things to it that were specific to our group, and everyone was very helpful, and it was quite straightforward to do, and most of it's common sense. These are some of the things that we had to think about and have bought for our risk assessment. Here's the table where we're going to put all our sanitizer. It's going to be under a tree so that people stay outside as much as possible. And this is the rider's kit. Again, we've thought about, rather than having all the hats and boots in a big box, each child has today been allocated with their own bag, and they will get a hat, a pair of boots, obviously we fitted these and we know they fit, and a pair of gloves. So they can be sprayed at the end of every session, but also they're then quarantined until the next week, a second line of defence, if you like. And we're bringing back a school group as our first group, so they come as one group and the teachers will be with them. It's a closed group, they're in a bubble. It'll be much easier for them to come back as phase one before we bring our other riders back who perhaps need a bit more support. Everything was very straightforward to do. The help is there from RDHQ if you need it. We're really looking forward to starting riding again in a couple of weeks' time, and I hope that your group won't be long behind us if you're not already started. Thank you for watching.
So I'd like to thank Claire and all at Ipswich RDA for that, and obviously you can hear in her voice the excitement about getting started again. I'd like now to turn to Lesley, who's going to be kind of our guest speaker for today, to tell us a little bit about getting started at her group at Beaver Vale. Can I kick off by just asking you to tell us a little bit about your group, please, Lesley?
Hi, yes, certainly. So I'm Lesley Davies. I am founder and chairman of Beaver Vale RDA, which is based on the Leicestershire-Nottingham border. Before pre-COVID, we had about 27 participants and about 22 riders, 22 volunteers. We were keen to get going because we were in the fortunate position that our riders were independent, so we're coming at weekends primarily with their parents and carers. And we knew that there was a possibility then that we could get them in individually. And we based it on the riders that we knew would ride independently or just needed a leader, which we then trained the parent for. So we started actually back in July last year. So we've been going a little while now, barring the lockdowns that we've had.
Thank you very much. So I guess my first question, and lots of people will be wanting to know this listening, is what was the first step that you took on your journey to getting started?
The dreaded paperwork, obviously, which I'm not a lover of paperwork, but it had to be done. And I'm looking at, if I look at a blank piece of paper or a blank screen, you know, where do you begin? So I decided, well, what I had already was our existing risk assessment. So I took that and looked at it and thought, well, what do we do for each of the points that we need to do differently or change or add to make ourselves COVID secure? And that sort of gave me a good basis. It didn't take 5 minutes. It took quite a while to go through, but it had a routine to it. I knew I could get to the end. And then I looked at actually the timeline of when my volunteers, all my participants would leave home, how I was actually going to run the sessions, what they would look like. Back in July, we obviously had very much more restrictions on number of households that could be together, the number of people that were allowed on site. So I needed to make sure that I'd zoned areas properly. And importantly, we had the right people working as a team where needed. It wasn't going to be back to the old days of 15 volunteers all on site at once.
Brilliant. So you talk about your team, which are obviously your volunteers. So how did you get them involved with getting started?
Well, we kept communication, you know, I sort of updated them and how things were going and our likelihood of when we were looking to restart. I then had to make sure that the reality of a session was going to be very different. The volunteers were not going to be so much involved in this within the session itself, but far more in the pre-session process. So the arriving on the yard to be able to get all their equipment together. Whereas before we'd all help each other and one person would get the tack together and then somebody else would perhaps support another person to tack a pony up. they were literally going to have to work independently and without supervision. So I needed to make sure that those volunteers were comfortable doing that. And then I talked through the process of how they would be responsible for warming the pony up for me as a coach, because I would then possibly be passing it on to a more inexperienced parent to possibly lead during a session. So I needed to make sure that they understood their responsibilities were going to be slightly different this time. And actually they were then going to be more involved also in, after the session, taking the pony back, untacking it, cleaning the tack, sanitizing it, and putting away every right place for the next volunteer the next day who might be using that equipment.
Brilliant. And when we spoke earlier, you talked about getting your participants involved as well. So how did you do that?
Well, we again looked at very carefully at our list to see which participants we could get in, and we had, unfortunately at the early stage, it was literally those that were riding independently or just needed help mounting, in which case we were going to have to train the parents or carers to help mount them, and or then the riders that could ride were stable enough in the saddle to just need a leader, and that then they initially had a parent that could be trained to be a leader within a session. We were fortunate, we had several parents that were actually horsey, so they were initially on our list, but we did it very gradually. I think the first weekend, where I normally ride, as many up to 20, 23 participants through the weekend, we were down to running 4, I think, at the first weekend, and it felt like 50. Because it's all so strange, but gradually with time it gets easier and you get used to things.
And you've talked quite a bit about independent riders. Does that look different now from obviously back in July? You were talking about starting with 4. Are you involved with sort of less independent riders, should we say now?
Yes, we definitely, the ratio has changed very much more. I mean, we are obviously just waiting for those riders to be allowed back that only need one side walker. We've worked quite a bit with riders that have only, needed a leader, and that's changed over time, that now we can lead more in a session with the 1 metre plus with mitigation for our volunteers, because quite a few of our ponies are quite small. So for our volunteers to lead at 2 metres, which was the initial restriction, was not really practical. But now, and of course, but we have a good portion, 25% of our participants require 2 side walkers. So we are really desperate to get those riders back. But of course, at the moment, that's not going to be possible.
Yeah, so fingers crossed for the 21st of June or 28th of June in Scotland, that actually we can bring 2 sidewalkers back, because that's what we're hoping and expecting.
Yeah.
How did you feel on your first day back? I think you've just said that 4 felt like 50. So can you describe that?
It's a bit like that night before going back to school after the summer holidays. You knew where the school was, you knew you'd be seeing basically the same people, and the actual buildings wouldn't have changed or anything. But it was going to be different. And, there's a lot of responsibility on coaches, on everybody, but I particularly for coaches, because it's your responsibility to make sure the session runs, safely, both COVID securely and safely, just health and safety generally. And still, let your participants come and be, as far as they're concerned, they're riding and having a wonderful time. You don't want to make it a stressful time for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we spoke earlier, you talked about how there are a number of things that you've put in place because of COVID that you think you might continue into the future. It would be interesting just to kind of share some of those things.
Oh, definitely. We used to run back-to-back sessions, so we could almost run 4 or 5 sessions back-to-back at a weekend, half-hour sessions. And we tried to make them as efficient and as friendly as possible. But other than the first session where I was able to sort of welcome the riders onto the ponies, have a little chat with them, there was very little time for that communication, and also a debrief afterwards. Whereas now with COVID, we run, because we're based with a riding school, we own our own ponies, but we are based in a livery stables with a riding school. We now alternate, so we have an able-bodied lesson with a riding school and then RDA. So that gives me as a coach much more time just to sort of set everything up and also welcome and have a little chat beforehand. And that's really helped build relationships with the families. and that's really been nice. So I'll continue that, and also appreciate my volunteers, and they've had to step up and take responsibility, and they've done it so well. So perhaps I need to stand back a little bit and let them take a bit more responsibility. They are lovely, and you know, it's worked really well.
Fantastic. And you said you were operating from a riding school. How did you kind of work with the riding school when you kind of initially came back? How did that work?
Well, we are lucky that Abby, who is the owner of the Livery Yard and Riding School, she is also a green coach and a trustee for Beaver Vale. So obviously communication as trustee, she knew exactly what direction we were going and how we were going to run it. And so we were in conversations, you know, continuously, and the agreement was she would sort of step out of RDA as far as the coaching was concerned. I would carry on doing the coaching of RDA, and she would do the riding school. But we also own our own horses there, so we were involved in their care and obviously had access to them other than the first couple of weeks of the first lockdown. So we could supervise how they were going on with their getting fit and their filling out the form for the ponies to be back in RDA.
Brilliant. And I guess what would be the key messages for the people that are watching about getting started that you'd want to kind of convey from your experiences?
Oh, it's all worth it. Please get people back on ponies. You know, nothing beats that feeling. Take your time. It does take time to get used to the manoeuvring around. I mean, we still are trying to maintain a social distance of 2 meters wherever possible in our work. We're outside, we haven't got an indoor school, but we are still trying to do that. So it does take some practice. So the sooner you can get your volunteers back on site, getting used to the leading and the various different you know, positions that we have to do now slightly. And I mean, I used inductions, so on a one-to-one basis of getting my riders and my participants back, riders and my volunteers back, and that was a really good way to get them back on site and with conversations and make sure everybody was happy with what we were going to be doing.
So it sounds to me a bit like some of the kind of planning bit, which I guess is the paperwork, and you talked about kind of walking it through. Then it's the kind of communication, which is kind of induction, and then it also sounds like practice as well. Practice makes perfect.
Yeah, as perfect as we can make it, definitely, because it is also strange. You know, we've been used to doing it so much one way. We do need to sort of alter it a little bit, and it's not all for bad either. It's not all for that.
And you also mentioned that you had some support as well from others within the RDA network.
Oh, completely. I mean, head office have been fantastic. You know, talk me through all especially the paperwork side of things. And if I had a query about something that I didn't understand, but also regionally, Karen Thompson, who's one of our regional coaches, she actually allowed me to go and watch on site in her early days of starting up, which each group is different. So one plan is not going to work for every group or whatever, but it just sent me in the right direction to what I could do, what we could do at Beaver Vale.
And that's a brilliant piece of advice, because now that everyone can travel a little bit more and people are kind of more comfortable about getting out and about, actually going visiting another group nearby that has got started is really key, because as you say, even though every group is different, everyone can learn something from other groups.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you'd like to add to all those wonderful pearls of wisdom that you've provided us with?
No, just I think I just say it is scary in the early days. Just keep on, it is worth it. The feedback we've had back from our riders and families that have been missed so much, we're back riding, and they're just delighted to be back, and our volunteers as well, there's no doubt. But,
fantastic. Thank you so much. I'm going to just hand over to Caroline briefly and ask if there's anything that you want to add in the discussions that you've just heard.
Well, firstly, thank you, Lesley, because I thought that was a great description of a group coming back, and actually very inspiring. I just made some notes during that, actually, just really thinking about the importance of starting those conversations. I think between the two of you there, you just mentioned, possibly inadvertently, so many times about the important conversations that you were having during particularly those early times, and that actually the thing that sort of strikes me about this is, if you forget the process, the single thing that is going to get groups open is somebody deciding that they want to. And the only way that that's going to happen is in those early conversations with somebody just being confident and brave enough to say, I think this is what we should do. And that doesn't mean you're suddenly going to reopen exactly the way that you were, or with all the people that you were working with before. But if you say, no, we're not going to open, that door just remains completely shut. And the thing that we've learned in the last few months is just what amazing things can happen if you slightly open that door to saying, yes, okay, maybe we could. And then now I'm hearing about groups doing such extraordinary things, not on a big scale, but just making some really, really beautiful things happen. And I spoke to a group today who had just filmed their regional qualifier, and that's nothing to do with COVID, nothing to do with restarting, apart from the fact that, of course, they're having to film it for the virtual regional qualifiers, which means for the first time ever, they're getting more riders than they normally would. She said they had a really exciting atmosphere on site, despite the fact there was hardly anybody there. And she'd been finished about 2 hours, and she said, I'm still buzzing. I was just buzzing. And, I think we've all missed these RDA moments, and just opening that door to saying, I think there's something that we can do as a group. You open the door to all of those possibilities, which I just think is such a sort of magical and powerful thing. And then more specifically, I think actually just making sure you're having conversations. If we've got groups that are still shut, which we know we have, there's also a risk we've still got groups who aren't in contact with their volunteers and riders and families and schools. And it's now been a really long time without those people feeling engaged and being part of the RDA experience. So really, first off, if that's not happening, I'd really urge people to pick up the phone and start a conversation with somebody, reach out to the network and remind them that you're still there. And then if that conversation maybe turns to whether or not you're going to start thinking about doing something, then all the better. But first things first, just pick up the phone and start having those conversations with your RDA family. And one of the things I think, well, Lesley touched on this, but I'm hearing about quite a lot of the sort of unforeseen benefits, the unexpected benefits of the way we're having to work now. Riders being off the lead rein that people didn't realize we're going to have the confidence to do that is completely brilliant. Parents being more involved with their riders, becoming more skilled, becoming more involved with the RDA group and understanding those benefits so much more. Something Lesley touched on there, which I'd heard elsewhere, is in restructuring the sessions, some people are finding that the riders are actually having a kind of more extended experience. So more time for having a bit of a pony pat and a cuddle. Some groups are even using their new quiet corner. So there's a bit of a run session, and then that ends with a bit of quiet time at the end with a pony. And that's actually an experience that people think, well, I'm going to carry on doing that even after all this, current nonsense is over. We've built something really beautiful there. And I think also more importantly, volunteers being engaged as well, that they're trying something new. They're having to try some different ways of working, taking more responsibility. And particularly in groups where, perhaps things have been running the same way for a long time, we've really been given an opportunity to shake things up and allow people to demonstrate their skills and step up a bit and take on some new roles. So, and finally, I would really just urge people to lean into the RDA network here. It's so isolating. This whole experience has been isolating for everyone. We've literally been isolated at home, and it's sometimes just difficult to remember that RDA network is there. And we're really, really lucky with how many brilliant people there are in this organization. So I would use the fact that you can contact your regional chair, your regional team, use them as much as possible. And as these guys have just been saying before, contact local group, contact a group that's going through the same thing, contact a group that also hasn't opened, and talk it through, you know, see if you can encourage each other forward to those first steps. So really, really lean in. It's a great time to be part of a national organisation and use that structure to your advantage as much as you possibly can.
Thank you so much. That's why you're head of communications, isn't it, Caroline? So, and for people, if you don't know who to contact, then all of the group contacts will have received an email recently from Faye, which may have disappeared into your junk folder. We know a lot of people it's disappeared there. And each group contact will have all the contacts for groups, county roles and regional roles within their region. So if you don't know who to contact, please make sure you look out for that email, or just pick up the phone to National Office, or drop an email to groupsupport@rda.org.uk. If you don't want to talk to a person, which we think you probably should first, there are still lots of videos and things and resources to help you. So the Road to Restart page on the MyRDA website has 5 steps to restart. But we've also got 3 videos on the YouTube channel. So if you go to the homepage of MyRDA, in the bottom left-hand corner, there is the YouTube link. And then if you look out for 3 videos, one is called Road to Restart Step-by-Step Guide. The second one is Road to Restart Trustee Checklist. And the third one is Road to Restart Risk Assessment. And that basically talks you through all of the paperwork. But if you're not sure, like Lesley said, just pick up the phone and just ask the question. We have lots of people on hand to help you. And we've heard lots and lots of queries. There is definitely no such thing as a silly question. All questions are valid. So please get in contact with us. I'm slightly looking at the time now, and I'm looking at the Q&A. If anybody's got any questions, just pop it into the Q&A and we'll hopefully be able to answer it. I'll wait for people to do that. And I'm going to have a little video now from our National Equine Lead, Doug Smith, who's talking a little bit. Once you've done all the paperwork, you need to think about your equines. So I'm going to try and share my screen again to see if I can show you this video. Here we go.
Now, getting back to work. You'll have done the forms. You're happy and confident with those. You'll have done all the training for your volunteers. You'll be happy and confident with those. Your volunteers will be happy and confident to come back to you. You'll have done your risk assessment for your venue. You'll have done your equine assessment as if you were starting from scratch. So you look at all your equines, make sure they're up to the job. You'll have done your condition scoring to make sure that we work them accordingly. The next step is working with them before you start to use them. It doesn't have to be a great deal. Just spend time with them, get used to them again, build the relationship again so that they know and trust you. It might be by riding, it might be through a bit of groundwork, it might just simply be by spending time with them in the stables. But what that will do is reinstate your confidence, because don't forget, horses can read us like a book. So if you're confident and relaxed, the horse will be confident and relaxed, and by extension your riders will get the best possible outcome. I have every faith in you that you will restart and come back even stronger than we were before. Good luck, and if ever I can be of use, please feel free to pick up the phone or drop me an email. That's what I'm here for. Good evening to you all. See you again soon. Take care. Bye-bye.
So thanks, Doug, very much for that. I've actually, during that, got one question that's come in. So it says, what is the underline on face masks, please? I think it maybe meant guideline. Volunteers, participants. So there are certain occasions where we're saying you must wear face coverings. So that's in those situations where you need to breach social distancing. So if you're supporting a rider to mount or dismount and you need to get closer than that 2 meters, then you should wear a face covering while you're doing that. If you are a carriage driving coach, you also need to wear a face covering while you're in a carriage with a driver as well. So the key thing is about, are you breaching that social distancing? Therefore, you should wear a face covering. Where we've got one side walker that's from outside the household bubble, they will be breaching social distancing. So they will also need to wear a face covering. The leader will be much further away, and so they need to mitigate any risk by either looking away at all times from both the rider and any side walker that is present, or wear a face covering. They can choose to do both. The leader has to be on the opposite side of the equine to the side walker if you have both of those in place. Riders, we do not recommend wear a face covering because we think it can get tangled, and also there are issues potentially with communication. We also don't recommend that coaches, while they are coaching, wear a face covering because they can easily be socially distanced, and we want to make sure that they can communicate with the riders effectively. So as I say, there are a handful of times where you must wear face coverings, but by and large, you don't need to wear face coverings. Volunteers can choose to wear face coverings at all times if they feel more comfortable in doing so. So that's a key thing with anything that we're doing. We need to make sure all of our volunteers and our participants are comfortable and happy and happy to come back. And given the weather that we're having now and forecast, I think we'll all be wanting to come back a little bit more when it was pouring with rain. So my second question, as the restrictions are all lifting after the 21st of June, when COVID is gone, do we still need to do all the COVID paperwork? So this was something that I tried to allude to at the very beginning. So the paperwork may change slightly. However, we still will need to sign you off. The reason we will need to sign you off is because as a group, you will have been shut since March last year. And everyone, coaches, volunteers, equines will all be very rusty. So from a health and safety point of view, we will need to sign you off. We will need to see your risk assessment. We will be reviewing the guidelines that come out prior to the 21st of June in England and seeing where we need to amend the paperwork. However, we do need to bear in mind, even though government are saying restrictions will be lifted, I think there will still be recommendations in place around social distancing and face coverings. Now, if we look at other countries such as Jersey and Guernsey, where they don't have social distancing or requirement for face coverings, they have said actually those things should remain in place for people who are vulnerable. And so that may be people in the older age range, that may be people with certain medical conditions. And some of our participants and volunteers will fall into that category. And so we do need to think that actually, I don't think it will be a flicking a switch and suddenly all of the restrictions will go overnight. So there is no real need to delay. If you're not keen on paperwork, unfortunately, because you've been shut for such a long period of time, there will still be some paperwork to do. And the paperwork isn't there to be a barrier. It's really, as Lesley talks about, to kind of make you think and kind of walk you through the process of everything you need to think about on site, and to make sure you can be kind of confident when you come back that you've thought about everything and that you've shared that thinking with your volunteers, with your participants, and with everybody that needs to know. So I think that's all the questions that I've got. Oh no, hang on. So when we do driving, we're not ready in the riding section, but driving is getting near to restart. Can we do a separate restart for driving? Yes, absolutely. So when you want to do a restart, submit the paperwork for what you want to restart. So if you're just bringing volunteers back to train your equines, just fill in the paperwork for that. That is absolutely fine. So driving, it's fine if you want to have that a little bit later down the line. We have the carriage driving protocols in place. There is a separate carriage driving risk assessment, so you will need to complete that as well if you want to restart carriage driving. The one thing we do ask is if you have filled in the trustee checklist to bring your volunteers back, for example, to train equines, you may not have ticked all the boxes that say yes, and that's absolutely fine. But when you do then bring participants back, we then do need a document to say that actually all of the things, including the questions for participants, can be answered as well. So I think that's us in terms of questions. Oh no, they're coming in now and I'm running out of time. Oh, that was just a thanks. That's fine then. So any final comments that you want to make, Lesley?
No, just to say, you know, we do a wonderful thing. The RDA is such a magnificent organisation, and it's just great to be actually getting riders back and volunteers back on site.
Brilliant, Bat. Thank you very much. And we need to remember it's what you can do that counts. I know that sounds a little trite, but if you can only bring people back for a quiet corner, or if you're sending a volunteer to go and visit a school, or if you're just, I don't know, phoning up a volunteer, just take that little step today, because it will make such a big difference to people's lives, and we can get back to delivering the wonderful things that Caroline started to talk about for the rest of the year and into 2022. So thank you so much for your input, both Caroline and Lesley, and hopefully catch up with you all soon. Thanks very much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.